groups and the subsequent drama it invites is some of the best writing
That's an
in the
ugly.
show. The second half of season 4 might be my favorite stretch of episodes across the entire series. Tyrese escaping Lizzie, Mika, and Judith and running into Carol is incredible for the drama the situation invites. But honestly, I felt really bad for Tyrese on the road with these two little girls and a baby. Not to mention one of them is a rabbit-killing psychopath. When he sees Carol, he's so relieved to have somebody else to rely on now, and Carol's kind of taken back because she doesn't really know what he knows. It's a great scene and sets up a great episode down the road. The episode Inmates is such a great paced episode showing multiple different storylines in one episode. Why they ever went away from doing this, I have no idea. This episode was fantastic, seeing the different point of views and landmarks that all the characters pass at one point or another, but barely miss each other. I also love how cheesy the intro that Abraham, Rosita, and Jean is. It leads you to think that they might be villains, but when you understand the character of Abraham later on, this intro is hilarious. Glenn saving Tara proves again that he is a man too good for this world, but it ends up doing him great favors in the long run. The way that
MP said he woke up today ready to slay some.
heartbreaking, and generally everything that happens in this storyline makes it seem like he's never been seen. Yeah, this also shows us the strength of Glenn. His determination to find her again, no matter how injured he may be, is one of the many qualities that makes us love Glenn and identify with who he is. Another thing I love about the storyline is Eugene. While he tells the group that he has to get to DC to develop a cure, there's all these hints and clues that make Eugene seem like he's not really in a rush to get there. I wonder why that is. The whole branching storylines and seeing hints and clues of where the others were in different storylines and episodes, and this mystery builds up over this Terminus place. There's just something about it that speaks to me, and it's honestly when the show really started gripping me for the first time I ever watched it. The build up to Terminus and how each group gets together, their individual storylines, the Claimers, meeting Abraham, and introducing that whole storyline. Even the Daryl and Beth stuff isn't horrible like everybody makes it out to be. The episodes with multiple point of views honestly remind me of the early Game of Thrones episodes. It progresses the storylines, and each scene was meaningful without having any fat. There's a rule in writing called get in late, get out early, which essentially means to cut out any fat from the scenes. For example, Rick wakes up when the Claimers are in the house and leaves when he sees an opening. We don't need to see Rick fall asleep, see the Claimers find the house, go inside, and then have Rick wake up. We get what's going on without having all that setup. When we leave the scene, we see that Rick has an opening to escape and stop Michonne and Carl from getting closer, so he takes it. We don't see him explain how he got his murder jacket or what happened inside. We don't need to. That's obviously what he's going to tell them, but since we just saw it happen, we don't need to hear about it again. And that's how all of these plot lines are structured. We see what we have to, and then cut away when we're done. The later seasons started to lose this rule, which is why a lot of people think they're boring. They also go from showing us multiple storylines to one, which is another issue a lot of people have with the episodes still. The switch from having multiple different storylines to just one doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. While I don't hate the Daryl and Beth episode, a lot of it could have been cut and still kept all of the emotional beats that really make the episode while progressing the other storylines. If you haven't seen what Maggie, Sasha, and Bob are up to for quite a while, that could have been included here, along with Carol, Tyrese, and the girls. We don't need to see every single storyline. Episode 10 doesn't have Rick, Michonne, or Carl, but I bet a lot of people didn't even realize that because of the progression of other storylines and how well paced that episode was. This episode just doesn't feel entirely necessary to have one storyline. If you're going to do that, you better have a damn good reason why. Episode 9 only has Michonne, Rick, and Carl, partly to put the spotlight on Michonne and Carl, but also to keep some suspense about the other people and if they're alive. There's another episode that does only one point of view, but it's given a really great reason for it to only be one storyline. But the other side of this argument for this episode is that Daryl and Beth think that everybody else is dead. They think it's just them, so we're right along there with them. It's just us, Daryl, and Beth. It's also much cheaper for an episode to only have one storyline and not pay the other actors, and get the other locations, etc., and that's the real reason for why there's only one storyline. The conversations between Daryl and Beth in this episode are all really great and progress both of these characters a lot. The ending is also really fun, brings the themes of the episode together really well, and overall this episode shows us that Daryl can't remotely handle his alcohol. There's a lot that's been said of Daryl and Beth's relationship. Some people think that it's a brother-sister type of friendship. Other people think that they were setting up an actual romantic partnership. And this was also the time when people thought Daryl might be gay. I think there's good evidence enough for actually all of these theories, but to me it really does seem like they were setting up a romantic relationship. I think it's why they dedicated a whole episode to them, and I honestly think that was the plan. It's obviously not how it ended up, so it seems much more like a brother-sister relationship now, and that's fine because it's also believable in that regard. But I don't know, I really feel like it was intended to be something else. He literally sets up a date and carries her through the door. Like, come on now. The other episode that only features one storyline is episode 14, The Grove. What I love about The Grove so much, and this whole plot line around Carol and the girls, is we want to root for Carol and what she's saying to these kids to ready them for the world ahead, but we also get to see some insight into Lizzie and her mental state. So we're seeing Carol kind of feed this do or die mindset to Lizzie, and it's obviously not helping her, but Carol can't see that because she thinks Lizzie is just getting stronger, and eventually she'll grow out of the whole walkers are still people idea. The Grove is like a film of itself. This could be the plot of an apocalypse movie without all the background layers, and it would still all mostly make sense. But when you have episodes like this in a TV show, an episode that warrants the single storyline because of how it's structured like a movie, you can tell this story in just 45 minutes because it has all these background layers from episodes previous. This is the darkest episode of The Walking Dead, not only because of its subject matter, but because of how well the story had been set up right from the very first episode of the season. It has huge and devastating payoffs, and above all else, shows a darker side of this world that we already knew was very dark. The penultimate episode of the season reunites Glenn and Maggie's groups together, and they march towards Terminus, some magical safe haven that seems strangely empty, but she says we'll make you a plate of food, so that's good. Wait a minute, what does she mean by that? Another thing I have to point out is the dynamic between Michonne and Carl. It's so great, and even though she starts off just being like a friend towards him, Michonne is a far better mother figure than Lori ever was, and I think Carl realizes that. This, among other reasons, is why the finale A is my personal favorite finale of all time. The switch and contrast between Farmer Rick in the past and the present Rick is amazing. It has my favorite Rick Grimes moment ever, and I love how the episode starts off with Rick teaching Carl how to trap things, just to get caught in a trap at the end of the episode. That being said, screwing with the wrong people is such an incredibly lame line to end the season on. Yes, I understand there's a different version, and the television rules at the time didn't allow any swearing, but if they could have somehow convinced AMC just this once to add it in there, it would have been so much sweeter. And those are my thoughts on Season 4 of The Walking Dead. Future Thrifty here, I just realized I forgot to rate this season. This, like I said, has the best second half of any season in the show, in my opinion. The first half of the season is still good, and it also has one of the best episodes in the entire series. Throw in some of my personal favorite moments in the show and my personal biases for this season, and I'm going to give it a 9.3 out of 10. I have a lot to say about this season. It's one of my top 3 favorite seasons, with the other 2 being seasons 5 and 6, so expect to see some longer videos for the next couple months discussing those seasons, and probably longer videos from here on out, because the seasons just get longer, and I'll have a lot to say. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more season retrospectives, make sure to subscribe for more. I'm covering a new season every month of this year, and don't forget to follow me on Instagram and join the Discord server. Special shout out to my channel members. If you want to become one yourself, feel free to hit that join button. If you do, then I'll see you guys in the next one. while I've been doing this series, I've been seeing a lot of comments that have a problem with the title of my last video on Season 4, about how it's the start of the Golden Era, because some people think the prison was the best era, and the show went downhill from there. Well, I can tell you from the ratings of the show, viewership numbers, and most importantly, my own opinion, that you're wrong for thinking that. Because guess what? We're on to Season 5, and what I consider to be the Golden Era of the show. For a lot of people, Season 5 is the definitive season of The Walking Dead. It has the highest highs, some of the best episodes of the series, and it's generally considered to be either the best or one of the best seasons to the audience. So when I was rewatching this season, I was incredibly excited because I'm of the opinion that the season is definitely one of the best, but I was also a bit taken back because while the season is home to some of the best episodes of the series, it was also when I started to notice the cracks in the foundation, cracks that would eventually split open and let the show become what it's now known for, a literal zombie of its former glory. It made me think twice about this actually being the Golden Era. Were the comments about this being the best actually right? No, they can't be. The season is so great, but also not. To get to the bottom of this, I took extensive notes on this season because I'm going to be going over why this season is the golden era of The Walking Dead, but also not as great as I remember. So let's get right into my thoughts on The Walking Dead Season 5. So the first thing I obviously have to bring up about this season is the trailer, because back in the day, The Walking Dead would always get these special extended Comic-Con trailers, and it really started with Season 4, but this season they didn't want to spoil how giant the first episode was going to be, so they, well,
enjoying this stuff.
let's just say they didn't tell the audience the truth about what was going to happen this season. I made a whole video about this trailer and a couple from the other seasons, but this trailer really went out of its way so that way it wouldn't spoil anything for the premiere, and I think it's worked out in its favor because not only is the premiere one of the 3 highest rated episodes of the show that are all tied for first, but this premiere episode was also the most watched episode in the history of the show. Yes, even above the first episode of Season 7. And it's for good reason that so many people watched this episode and it's rated so highly because this episode is phenomenal. I still think it's crazy just how far they go in the opening minutes. It's a bit jarring when you're binge watching it coming from Season 4, when everything about Terminus was kind of teased. But in the first couple minutes, they go full on, they don't pull any punches in what is definitely up there with some of the darkest scenes in the entire show. But I think what is so great about this episode is how there hadn't been a premiere of this level before, both in this show and I'd say most other shows out there. When you compare it to the season opener of the season before, there is a clear winner. Most season openers are in charge of setting up the story of the season, whereas this one was in charge of mostly ending the storyline that was set up in the previous season. Kinda a weird choice. I'm sure it won't be a decision they make again in the future in order to kind of replicate the results of this episode. This episode is almost like if Too Far Gone was the premiere of Season 4. Sure, they just handled the governor, but what if after a time skip he came back and the opener was just the prison getting destroyed? We have no clue where they're going from there because it's such a wild card of an episode, and especially an episode to open the season on. That's exactly what No Sanctuary is. This episode highlights Carol in a number of ways. We obviously see what she's capable of doing, but there's also a callback to the episode where she was last with the entire group, because this guy is in the lineup at the trough. I think his inclusion in this episode was there to remind Rick of the last time he saw Carol, back when he had things under control and made the decision to leave her behind. So for Carol to save Rick and everybody else, and for him to ask for her forgiveness, just shows how far both of these characters have come since the last time they saw each other. So yeah, it seemed that Terminus was dealt with after a single episode. The trailer straight up lied to us, so where do we go from here? Well, from here, we get the entire group together, and this is far and away the greatest version of the group that the show ever gave us. While I have some issues with the upcoming storyline, this group on screen, their dynamics, their conversations, it makes everything worth it. On this watch, I found myself caring about each and every character. Sure, sometimes they don't
What? I
do
can't look
much,
at
or
you?
the writers come up with some storylines that seem
I'm
a
just
little
looking
bit
at you.
contrived, and like they're just adding in stories for
I'm
characters to give
amazed
them
at your
something new.
beauty.
But compared to the groups of the later seasons, each of these characters are just so great to watch. Even the lower tier characters like Rosita, Gabriel, and Eugene end up becoming prominent characters in the future, and it's cool to see their origins, especially for Father Gabriel. But this is also the season that Rick Grimes became the best character in the show. And I know that sounds weird to say with him being the protagonist and all, but season 5 Rick took absolutely zero risks. He didn't care about who you were, if you did any harm to his family, if you were even a threat to his family, he took you out. He's almost kind of similar to another character now. And speaking of Father Gabriel, he gives off all kinds of red flags after everything the group has been through. This is heightened by the white cross on the car that took Beth and him being a priest. I mentioned this before, and a lot of people were like, oh yeah, I never made that connection. But that was the first thing I thought of when I saw a priest, and especially the car a few episodes later. He seems to be guilty of something, which he is, but fresh off the heels of Terminus, we think there's something far more sinister up his sleeves. This is part of the reason why Four Walls and a Roof is such an excellent episode. We learn more about Gabriel's backstory and how he really is just a guy that's lucky to survive as long as he has, and then we get the conclusion to the termites, see their full intentions, and see Rick follow through on a promise he made to Garrett. It ends a phenomenally paced first 3 episodes, but this also spelled kind of trouble because the storyline that had been marketed to keep people around was now completely over, which leads me to the Beth portion of the story. I have a lot to say about the Beth storyline, but let's go over the good stuff first. I think there being remnants of a police force trying to maintain their past lives, but also taking advantage of their power is a really great plotline on paper. Beth is an interesting character to be given a full storyline for herself, and I mean that in 2 different ways. She hasn't been given a ton of spotlight in the past, so now seemed as good a time as any to promote her. But that's also interesting because Beth, of all characters, gets put in the spotlight. She gets an entire episode by herself, and when you consider characters like Glenn, Maggie, Michonne, and even Daryl to an extent, haven't been given episodes where they're the sole focus, it's just a little bit strange. It felt like the beginning of Beth being given the prominent main character billing in the opening credits, but we all know that's not exactly what happened. So let's go over the bad. Beth wasn't given a bigger role. We spent 3 episodes looking for her, just for her to die when we get to her, making this whole plotline feel like a complete dead end. Did it impact other characters and further their development? Not really. Maggie asked about her sister once, off screen.
Alright, guys, I just Netflix this Athletic Store and discovered their new Dawn pan. And this is like a tech pan. That's not
And Daryl gave an incredibly sad response to her death, but after Coda and like a few episodes later, Beth is never mentioned again. This whole storyline is just a dead end and signified a bigger problem with The Walking Dead, and that's the need to have shocking deaths. The last mid-season finale ended with a shocking death, so this one must have that too. But the shocking death in Too Far Gone wasn't the point of the episode, it was the loss of the prison. The point of Coda was and is Beth's death, and I guess the group having to go back out on the road again, but why? It would be one thing if Noah became an irreplaceable character of the group, would go on to help them in ways that nobody else could, but that's also not what happens, because Noah dies this season too. Outside of a few questionable character arcs like Lori and Andrea, this was the first plotline in the show that truly didn't feel like it was necessary. It was a troubling sign of things to come back when the show truly felt untouchable and had everybody on their heels week after week. I like how the group splits back up after the whole Terminus debacle is dealt with. I like there being multiple different storylines going on at once, but this was also the start of another bad trend. Having so many different storylines at once with only one story per episode. Sure, they also did this in the back half of season 4, so I guess it actually started there. But I don't know, I liked those episodes and how it was done, but one thing is true regardless of when it started, this is a story pacing killer. End of the third episode, there's a cliffhanger of Daryl coming back to the church with some mystery character. Next week, we get to see Beth with another cliffhanger. Week after that, we see Beth's going to Washington. Week after that, we're finally back with Daryl. But it takes the whole episode for us to see the resolution to the cliffhanger that was set up 3 weeks prior. This also meant that 4 weeks would go by without seeing the main character of the show. Now I know a lot of people don't have that issue now because the show is streaming everywhere, but the show did come out week to week, and this momentum killer style of formatting was, in my opinion, what truly led to the show's eventual downfall. And these problems were relevant way back in the golden era of the show, in a season that is a lot of people's favorite. Abraham's backstory is one of the most tragic in the entirety of the show, and doesn't really get brought up. He saves his family, but they're so scared of him that they abandon him. And then he finds Eugene, who tells him that he can save the world, so Abraham makes this quest, his whole personality, so that way he can forget the mistakes and the horror of his past. Mix all this together with a character who has the greatest one-liners and really leans into his corniness, and you have one of the best characters in The Walking Dead. Glenn has always been the level-headed character. He's the only one who can get Rick and Abraham to stop fighting, and he's really there for everybody no matter what. But as for Glenn and Maggie together, in the first half of the season, they're really kind of just there. They obviously have some badass scenes and good moments together, but this was a trend that would somewhat continue. One of them would have a storyline while the other one didn't, and then vice versa. But I don't think either one of them really had a standout storyline during these prime seasons. A lot of their lines come from the unlikely pairing conversations that they have with other group members, or just nice and sweet conversations with each other, but they don't really have anything that makes them stick out. Eugene's lie, and really the build-up of it, since the minute he's introduced, is really well done. There's so many different hints and clues to what he's truly trying to do, and it seems really obvious the second time around. I'm not too sure if the first time around I just wasn't as good as picking up at these things, but I didn't realize it. The reveal just absolutely breaks Abraham, and the whole episode is really great. In the episode Consumed, we get to see a lot of Carol flashbacks, some of them from well over a season ago, in locations that The Walking Dead rarely ever revisits, flashbacks or not. This episode also shows us how far the Daryl and Carol friendship has come. They have a reunion in the first episode, their back and forth is incredible, and I also thought that maybe these two could have a romantic moment or two. But ultimately, Daryl doesn't end up with Carol, or Beth, or Connie, or anybody that he's been shipped with, and I think there's something great about a manly man like Daryl, who's ultimately just a soft teddy bear, and is able to have friendships with women without it getting romantic. I like that. Rick and Michonne really are already a team. She talks to Rick like a partner, while everybody else talks to him like he's their boss. She's really the only one who can level his head, but she also supports Rick every step of the way. While their dynamic changes over the next couple seasons, the core of their relationship is their friendship and teamwork, and that's something that's very present here and has been present for like the whole season. So that episode is the most disappointing episode for me of the entire series. It was the first time the show chose shock value over good storytelling. It also doesn't make any narrative sense. They were trying to give Dawn this like saying she wants to change this place, name Beth as her successor, and for all this development, 5 episodes of it, to end it with Dawn killing Beth, and even Beth trying to kill Dawn, it doesn't make any sense. Is all of their development for the sake of misdirection? I guess, because otherwise it's just bad writing. It feels like 2 different drafts of scripts with different storylines spliced together. It also ends this half of the season on not only a bummer of a note, pretty directionless future. I have an analysis of this episode, but people always like to claim that this is a world where anything can happen. But let me remind you, this show is a drama first. This isn't some ultra-realistic apocalypse. Characters wear skinny jeans, they never have to go to the bathroom, they have perfectly white teeth. It's a drama with a ton of good-looking people. It's okay to prioritize the dramatic storytelling over the survival aspects, because this show, I hate to break it to you, is a drama first. I always say storytelling is built on principle. People don't really know what I mean by that, so let's go over some examples from this show. Actually, just this season. Morgan finding a paper that has Rick's name on it, coincidence. Carol finding and saving Drew at the exact moment that they're going to be killed, coincidence. Carol needing Noah, that, coincidence. The fire truck arriving the second the walkers are going to get out of the church, coincidence. This group arriving at the hospital right as the other group is bringing Beth out, coincidence. This show, every movie, every story is filled with coincidences. The only way I revise this statement is if it was like storytelling is built on luck, because a lot of coincidence and luck do overlap, especially in this show, and there are far more circumstances where the characters are lucky. What happens and what's going on is obviously another really controversial episode. It's also a very strange episode for mid-season premiere. I remember thinking back when this even came out, and I was like, the people who binge this series are going to see Beth's death and then Teresa's death in back-to-back episodes, and it's going to be quite a downer. And I was correct. My girlfriend said something about how depressing this season has been after watching this episode. But I think the group arriving at the Shirewell Estates is a really cool nod to the comics, and I really felt for Noah here. Imagine being away from your family and friends, just thinking every day about getting back to them, just for the place to be completely destroyed. Also, hot take here, but Tyrese this time around is a much less likable character than I remember. Tyrese's whole character is talking about how he lost Karen and how it impacted him. This would be one thing if we cared about Karen, or even Tyrese and Karen. We saw the relationship in season 4 for one episode, and that was his entire personality afterwards. He doesn't do a great job at making me care for him. Also, he knew Karen for what, like a couple months tops? It doesn't make for a compelling character because I didn't care about the relationship. It wasn't built up enough. Also, if she's so important, why isn't she in this episode? He's seen a bunch of important dead figures, even the governor for some reason, but not Karen. That being said, I do like Tyrese's death in this episode. I actually wish that we got more main character deaths from walkers. It's by far the most likely death in this world, and even if we got some sort of like copycat episode like this, with cameos from previous people, a very artistic style of filming and pacing, I'd be fine with it because this is a great episode. I suppose Rick's last episode kind of took the template from this episode, but that was more of a special occasion. This is also an important episode to show us just how vital it is for our group to find a home. The episode then shows us our group at the lowest they've ever been. They have the dog, they walk at a literal snail's pace, weight of energy, and this episode in particular focuses on 3 characters, that being Maggie, Daryl, and Sasha, aka the people who lost those recently. This episode is exhausting. You can feel just how beat down these characters are, and these 3 characters in particular have every reason to give up, but they don't. Rick also has this famous line,
With the G2A app, and unlock an additional 15% discount with the exclusive code Weekly Sale app. Remember, this offer is app only, so don't look now and start saving.
we are the Walking Dead.
He said it! He said it!
And we get a nice cliffhanger ending where some random guy comes up to them and says he wants to help. Oh boy. The whole Aaron plotline is excellent. We, as an audience, have been conditioned to not trust the people in this world, and Aaron comes across as somebody who's too good to be true in this world. So we're right there with Rick and his mindset. Aaron does come across as strangely untrustworthy, which is odd, because watching it with a new mindset and knowing who Aaron is, you see things differently, but watching the show with my girlfriend, I've never seen it before, and as soon as Aaron popped on screen and knew all about him, she said that they should just kill him right away. She didn't trust him whatsoever, and it's truly been an amazing experience watching it with her, because that was everything I thought the first time too. There are so many red flags raised. He doesn't tell them the whole truth about Alexandria. There's no pictures of the people, and Aaron ultimately seems too friendly. Episode 11 is all about wanting us to feel anxious and afraid of what could happen. For a whole technical season of the show, almost nothing good has happened to our group.
This all changes when we see Aaron with Eric. First time in a long time, was hope, and Rick's expression when they arrive says everything. We couldn't hear anything, they were on some terminus, we can hear. And as they enter Alexandria, we enter a whole new era of the Son of Dead, the modern Romney. Entering Alexandria is so jarring in the best possible. Even just seeing normal people in normal houses feels so outside of Walking Dead. We center mostly on Rick and Carl and their struggle to cope under these normal conditions. In this episode, Rick loses sight of everybody for like 2 seconds, has a full-on panic attack. Carl's hanging out with teenagers and doing normal teenage things, which must be so strange for him because last time things were normal, he was probably 8 years old playing toys. Their struggle to adapt to this new situation is what makes this episode and these next couple episodes so great. I love the interviews and hearing everybody's perspective on this place, how the group stays together at night, and how this episode was basically framed as if Rick or somebody is going to find some sort of crack in the system. And while there's flaws, there's never that big twist that any of them are expecting. This place is truly as it's advertised, which brings on a whole new set of problems. Now I'm going to talk about Carol again. We know Carol is a complete badass by now. We know everything she's been through, and the storyline for understanding is incredible. Remember, Carol wasn't around at this point in the comics, so they chose to have Carol play dumb, like she didn't single-handedly take out an entire community and save the whole group. I love this decision for her character, and it eventually makes for one of the best episodes of the series. Now, the amount of characters that they have to show and introduce and develop definitely becomes a balancing act. When they were on the road, it was less of an issue. The introduction to Alexandria and so many new characters having to be introduced and share the screen time means that a lot of people are shoved to the side. There were many times where I'll just forget about a character and go around the screen again, and then I'm like, wait a minute, where have you been this whole time? Spend is a really great episode, kind of. It raises the stakes and kind of brings us back to reality a little bit. Well, everything was going in the past couple episodes. You can see just different confidence from the Alexandrians and how the dust has settled, and we see very clearly that the Alexandrian way of doing things just gets people killed and it works. But like with that stuff, this episode needed a character to sacrifice, so let's start giving somebody a character. Then we'll ask Red, and then let's go. This is the same recipe that the show uses again, and again, and again, and again. And all of that started in this season. Like I have really in-depth episode analysis on it. I love the dynamic that Rick and Carol have. They are so invested in the problem of the Anderson family. Carol has a past history with abuse. Rick has feelings for Jesse, and I think everything about this conversation is great. Rick talks about the broken window theory and how windows stay intact and everything is fine. And of course, when the windows are broken, everything collapses. Does it feel like the typical storyline that we see out of most other drama shows? Yes, it does. But I think that this show elevates it. How many layers there are to this situation and this world. In-depth there are a ton of parallels this season between Rick Grimes is now. Shane was back in season 2. Here for an in-depth explanation on that, check out the 2 videos in the top right corner of the video. The season finale is very small scale in comparison to a lot of the other season finales, or even mid-season finales, but I think it's very character-focused and has a lot of different point of views that mix together very well. It's a great paced episode, the plot lines are built up suspensefully, and it all comes to a head. Again, very important. About that question ever since I was making this
video and watching the show again, I still don't really have a good answer. In some ways, I was really disappointed this season and with how some of the storylines played out. But then I think back to the first 3 episodes, everything happening in Alexandria, the Rick and Shane parallels, and how this is some of my favorite Walking Dead of the entire series. But this is also undeniably where the writers started struggling. Things didn't play out to a satisfying degree sometimes. There were questionable character choices and deaths, and the pacing in the first half of the season was what eventually would go on to kill the show. There's a big difference between this season and the later seasons that have all these issues, and it's the simple fact that I care about these characters. I cared about the stuff they were going through, how the situation around them changed them as people. I have a lot of nostalgia and love for this era of the series when I was on TV. Overall, I'm going to give this season of the show a 9 out of 10. Let me know your rating in the comments below, and also your thoughts on this season in general. Make sure to subscribe to see the continuation of the series every month of the year. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you all next one.
So mad, I should have moved my money. Oh, I had 30 on the contract card and at the Amazon card for 16. You know, remote the Amazon shit.
After all this time, we arrived to a season with very mixed results. A season notorious for fake out deaths, controversial episodes, and having one of the worst cliffhangers ever for the screen. But this is also a season that has the most episodes in the top 10 highest rated
I know, baby, I
list.
know.
So that holds
Do what you
the
do.
tie for the best episode of the show, and as to the best plotline of the show. Through all its faults, I still believe that The Walking Dead Season 6 is the best season of the show. But Thrifty, with everything you just said about it and all of its mistakes, how can this still be your favorite? Well,
I
that's
know,
sort of what I'm going to go over in this video.
Facts,
Pointing out the fair view faults that the other seasons had, and
Let's keep
probably
this
going to be
winning
pointing
streak
out
going.
more than ever before in this video, but through a mix of the season's highs, the story that it tells, and personal preference, I've been pointing out why this is my favorite season of the show as well. I'm sick, by the way, so sorry if I sound a bit different. But anyways, grab your flares, wonder who this Negan guy is, and we'll seal our way to The Walking Dead Season 6. But starting off with episode 1, I really didn't like the whole black and white flashbacks aspect. Starting out real strong and very long, that's my favorite season. And immediately go into what I don't like. But especially because this isn't real black and white, like you didn't shoot this in black and white film. They just took the scenes and dropped the saturation down to 0 like this. You can tell this is what they did because the trailer has scenes from the season opener that are in color. It just felt a little weird to me that the show didn't think its audience was smart enough to understand the difference between past and present. A little hint towards how this season in particular would treat its audience throughout the whole season. However, the story presented is really solid. We get to see the direct aftermath of Reggie's death and how this affects each character, and more of the much anticipated reunion of Morgan and Rick. There are some nice callback moments these two share in their dialogue, but their reunion is a bit underwhelming. Something I went over more in my episode analysis, which upon watching this again, I actually think their reunion makes a lot of sense. They're two very different men at different stages in their life, and yeah, they knew each other at the beginning, but this doesn't necessarily mean they owe each other anything in present day, especially in this kind of world. They don't turn into fast friends, Daryl doesn't get replaced as right-hand man, and for the most part, Morgan and Rick are just kind of around each other for most of the season. Does it make sense? Actually, yeah, it does, but it's still a bit disappointing. And because they didn't form any sort of emotional connection with each other, this spells certain doom for a plotline down the road, but I'll get there, well, when I get there. Now, the actual main plot with the Walkers that carries this entire first half of the season, and an additional episode after that, is one of the reasons why I love this season so much. Everybody always complains about how Walkers are never a threat in the later seasons, but here they were still presented as a major threat. In fact, this is the last time that they are treated as a major threat. After this, Walkers become obstacles to the road,
not something detrimental to their safety in the world, even when walkers, for some reason, learn to climb and fight back. This is still the last true time the walkers were seen as these horror monsters. I love the actual start, like the opening scene and the whole plan going sideways from the walkthrough of the plan. It proves that most of these people truly weren't ready for this mission, and now there's additional factors that they have to take care of. And I think this is far more interesting for the story rather than everybody being completely ready and the plan just not working. This way adds way more stakes to the story while still treating our characters with respect and not just making it seem like they had a bad plan. They had a great plan, but with the mix of it being too early and some other outside factors beyond their control, it forces them to improvise. When the opening scene came on, my girlfriend was like, how did we get here? Did we somehow skip an episode? Because it definitely feels that way at first glance with this mini time jump and Morgan just being part of the group now. But then, of course, it goes back into black and white, so that way we know that it's in the past. The second episode, JSS, shows us what happens back at home. And this is one of my favorite episodes in the entire show. While the boomerang style storytelling in seasons 4, 5, and 6 get on some people's nerves, myself included, I think this episode and this whole storyline with the Horde of Walkers actually gives a reason for it. Knowing that the A team is out there dealing with the Walkers and the B team is at home makes it the perfect time for the Wolves to strike. Not that they knew that the majority of the fighting force was elsewhere, or maybe they did, but writing-wise, it's perfect time. We see how weak the Alexandrians really are, and how some of them have taken on Rick's philosophy, but we also unleash the wolf in sheep's clothing named Carol. Some people don't like how Carol is able to just do all these amazing feats, and while it does get ridiculous as the show goes on, something like this is just because she's smarter than the enemy she's attacking. She puts on the wolf's clothing and blends in to attack them. She's not just going all John Wick on them. This also sets up the dynamic that she has with Morgan that will go on for the next 3 seasons. This episode just has perfect writing, and the circumstances around it are amazing. In episode 3, we cut back to where we left our characters in the first episode. The horde is blowing, our characters are retreating, panicking, trying to figure out what to do next and what's going on. We also continue the trend of seeing the Alexandrians not ready for a mission like this, and our group having to simultaneously try and fix the plan while saving the others. And Rick understands this. He knows that the Alexandrians aren't all going to make it back. He even tells that to Michonne and Glenn, who don't really want to agree with them, but as the episode goes on, it proves that he was right. The episode starts off with like an entire group of people, until they all split up, and a total of 3 people get back to Alexandria to try and fix the plan, but in that attempt, the characters make rash and personal decisions, and it doesn't end up fixing anything. We also get the end of the Glenn and Nicholas storyline. The storyline that I actually really like. This whole plotline shows us who Glenn really is at his core. He sees the good in people, and that sort of mindset can ultimately lead to your own demise in this world. Or maybe not, but this gave Glenn something to do in his time at the beginning of Alexandria. They plot line away from Maggie, and they also kind of do this with Maggie working with Deanna, but she also gets far less screen time than Glenn did. I have a lot of thoughts on this Glenn fake-out death, but I'll get to that a little bit later. The first 3 episodes of this season are what I believe to be the best 3-episode stretch in the entire show. Each episode just builds more suspense. The stakes just get higher and higher. I love the dynamics between the characters, the differences between our group and the Alexandrians, and how everything just seems to go wrong no matter what. If this had happened even just a month after Rick took over the place, everybody might have been more ready. Everybody would be more in tune with the plan, and all of this might have gone smoother. Even with the Wolves attacking, if the Alexandrians were better prepared, maybe not everybody walks out of this mission alive. So I was excited to see this momentum continue and see more of the stakes being raised. But then episode 4 didn't do that. Here's Not Here is a fantastic episode of Walking Dead.
Show
We
night
all
tonight,
wanted
man.
answers to the mysteries.
Get ready to light up.
Backstory and how he became who he is now. And the answers we get are great. Eastman is a fantastic character. The issue with this episode is there was late. This episode is standalone and entirely skippable. I usually do skip it when I'm watching the first half of season 6. Part of me wants to re-edit this first half of the season into one long, like 3 or 4 hour chunk. Keep the momentum going and not get away from it. Take out Glenn's fake-out death, and maybe one day I'll do that. I'm not sure if I can share it without AMC coming to my head, But I feel like that would be a really fun project, and yes, that is my idea of fun. The fifth episode goes back to our primary storyline, but definitely slows things down. I love Rick's arrival. It's gonna be bad.
They're gonna be bad. Okay, Coco. Going here.
But I can't imagine being somebody at Alexandria and having all these new people arrive and all these crazy, terrible things start happening. Like a week ago, they were living peacefully and had been for like 2 years, and now a ton of their members are dead. They're being forced to fight for their lives when they were seemingly fine until Rick Grimes showed up. In this slowed down episode, we get to see some minor character progress, like the continuation of the feud between Carl and Ron. It's either in this episode or an upcoming one, but they fight, and it's truly one of the worst choreographed fights I've ever seen in my life. We catch up with the rest of the Anderson family, and if Jessie is a hairstylist, why does she give her son the Will Byers haircut? Like, what's the point of your mom being a stylist if you're still just going to rock with this cut? There's a romance brewing between Rosita and Spencer, and at the same time, a romance is forming between Abraham and Sasha. So I wonder if these two will have some sort of mutual understanding and breakup. And honestly, I actually think that Rosita and Spencer look like a nice couple, and she could have actually changed him into becoming a better character. But that didn't happen. Abraham and Rosita don't mutually break up, and this was the start of a trend with really all female characters in the show, but Rosita especially, where if a woman doesn't have a storyline, just pair them up in a new relationship. This is something I noticed watching the series this time around, and it happens over and over and over again. And the writer's treatment of Rosita is far and away the worst when it comes to this, but that's a rant for a later video. Everything's setting up Rick and Michonne gets shoved way to the sideline in favor of Jessie, which I can see why they did that. I don't think their intention was to have this woman whose husband was just murdered in another love triangle with Rick and Michonne. But their scenes are cut back by so much that it's really noticeable. They had to separate them to further explore the Rick and Jessie romance, which might be a hot take here, but I actually really like them. Maybe it's just because I'm a sucker for this reality TV style romance between them, but I thought that they had good chemistry. I liked the character of Jessie and who she was turning into, and I felt like she was going to be the comic relief replacement, which is probably exactly what they wanted us to think for a later bait switch shocking moment. Episode 6, once again, shows us the Scott Gimple boomerang storytelling at its finest, but this episode isn't actually all that bad. In retrospect, we get character development for Sasha and Abraham. We see the Daryl set up with Dwight, Sherry, and the entire Saviors arc, and I don't think that this episode gets enough credit for that. But I remember first watching this episode, I didn't care about any of this. I just wanted to see if Glenn was alive or not, and now that we're going on 3 weeks of this cliffhanger with no answer, I was starting to lose interest entirely. I still firmly believe that a lot of these characters could have been condensed or combined for greater effect. This episode brings the character arc full circle for Daryl. He wanted to go out and recruit people, and when he tries to recruit these people, they ultimately end up betraying him. But it does make me wonder what would have happened if Dwight just accepted this help in the first place. At the beginning of episode 7, we return to the scene that Glenn died in for some reason. I don't know why they're making us relive this. It was so hard the first time. Oh, wait, it was actually Nicholas on top of Glenn? So Glenn's alive? Glenn's alive, everyone. So, what was the point of this? This fake-out death actually doesn't do anything for the story other than maybe add some more stakes. But it's not like there weren't already a sufficient amount of stakes to begin with. Tons of people have died on this mission. We find out that Maggie is pregnant. I guess it's to make us think about how terrible it would have been for Maggie to have this child without Glenn. And now that he's actually alive, we don't have to worry about that anymore. Wait a minute. Episode 7 is all about trying to keep Alexandria together. Literally, but also all the cracks are starting to form and people are starting to turn on each other, get angry with each other, which is pretty symbolic for where this place is as a whole when the wall falls. Episode 8 is probably the most underwhelming mid-season finale in the entire show. It doesn't have a shocking death for the sake of a shocking death, so I guess that's a win. Deanna's death is quite symbolic because the Alexandria she envisioned died this day right along with her, so it's sort of a cat that goes down with its ship ordeal. But a lot of the plot lines were still being set up so they couldn't get the payoffs needed to happen in this episode. We didn't get the payoffs because we spent so many episodes covering only one storyline and not in the way that was needed, like in JSS. But then we get the first official mention of this new villain guy named
Oh my
Negan.
god, this bum ass nigga
Big
keep
Buck.
getting
This
injured.
is another reason why this is my favorite season
I'm
of the
about to
show.
play Senna
I think
again.
the whole build-up to Negan is excellent. I
Oh,
remember the whole
man,
time
bro.
around this season airing and how much all the comic readers were hyping up Negan and all the different casting rumors for him. I think that the saviors themselves, and as they're presented in the back half, are honestly really menacing. They were such wild cards. You never really knew what they were going to do or say. This unpredictability actually made them pretty scary in a way that was lost later on. Now on to the episode No Way Out. The episode that should have been the mid-season finale, but they wanted to give people a reason to come back after the break, so it wasn't. This is the last of the 3 episodes that are tied for the highest rated of the series, and the more I watch this episode, the more I start to feel like it's a little overrated. The bulk of this episode is actually having to do with Denise and the Wolf, a storyline that I feel is alright, but I don't buy that the Wolf was changing into a good person whatsoever. It's the last 20 minutes or so that make this episode as highly rated as it is, and I think all of this is done incredibly well. The Alexandrians coming together to fight is really impressive and symbolic. The fall of the Anderson family is done very well and is very tragic, but I do think this episode is the worst of the highest rated episodes. It's still a great episode, I'm not going to say it's bad in any way, but just not as good as the other 2. Also, with this being the last episode that is this highly rated, in some ways it makes the show all downhill from here at this point onwards, which isn't that great considering we're only about halfway done with the show. The next world is a fun episode. There's not a lot of high stakes. I think it's a good palate cleanser from the previous episode and whole previous storyline. We also meet Jesus, which sets up a whole new world, and seeing more of the Rick and Daryl dynamic is always welcome. This is, of course, the first episode when Rick and Michonne first kissed and other stuff. And after rewatching this, seeing all the hints and clues leading up to it, I think this is a very earned moment. I remember when I first saw this, I thought it came out of nowhere, but I couldn't have been more wrong. The hints are literally there, like, from their first meeting. From an audience perspective, we saw far less of the Rick and Michonne dynamic this season, but we did see that Rick has come far enough emotionally to be ready to see someone else. In Thoughts Untied, with the amount of focus on Abraham, it almost seemed like this was the episode he was going to die. And going back to what I was talking about earlier with The Walking Dead and its treatment of female characters, let's talk about Sasha. Sasha just went through a whole storyline about finding a new purpose in life. She lost her last boyfriend and then her brother and wanted it all to end, but she continued on. So what can they do with her character now? Let's just find her a new love interest with Abraham. Oh, Abraham already has a love interest? Well, let's forget about her, and then eventually we'll just find her a new love interest too. Walking Dead didn't really know what to do with female characters other than make them love interests. I always talk about how I don't like the character of Rosita very much, and it's mainly because of this. But that's kind of what it boils down to. Maggie and Carol are honestly the only ones with a concrete storyline about something else other than being a love interest. Maggie starts to become the leader of the Hilltop, and that changes everything. Carol does become someone's love interest, but it's not her primary storyline, and the reality of everything she's done in this world just comes crashing down on her, which makes for an interesting storyline, I guess. But even Michonne, from this point forward, kind of just gets designated to Rick's love interest. Anyways, in this episode, we hear more about this vegan guy and his group of people called the Saviors. Rick offers to take them out because they seem like an issue, and our group has never really come across another group of people that they can't deal with, so why not? But they've also never really gone on the offensive before. And this leads me to my absolute favorite episode in the series, Not Tomorrow Yet. I've talked a lot about this episode in the past, and this is an extremely controversial and polarizing episode. A long time ago, I made a video about how this is the episode when our group became the villains, and some people agreed. Some people said it was hard to root for our characters after this episode, and some people say that the ends justify the means, and I absolutely love all the conversation and debates surrounding this episode. But one thing is absolutely certain in this episode, our group does something that they've never done before, attack another group first. No, those bikers stopping Daryl, Abraham, and Sasha on the road doesn't count because that was also in self-defense. And this episode changes the course of the entire rest of the show, for better or worse. I find it very interesting how Morgan is against this attack because he thinks that all life is precious and that no one is ever too far gone, so he starts building a cell. Just an interesting decision, not at all something I'm going to bring up later. This whole episode has stakes that feel very real, and like this is building up to something big, and that's because it is. We see that while not everybody wants to go through with this, they understand that it's the best course of action that they have to take, and in a lot of ways they trust Rick and what he thinks is best. So if he thinks that this is the best course of action, they're going to take it. This episode is brutal, and in some ways pretty hard to watch. Even our characters hesitate before fully going through with this plan, but as a firefight breaks out, it proves that our group was right and they could take these people on with no casualties, which is a little strange. This whole build-up to these saviors and this is what happens just seems a little too easy. The next episode, The Same Boat, shows us a different side of the saviors, and also the toll that this life and this lifestyle has taken on Carol and Maggie. This is a great episode. Shows us again how smart Carol and Maggie are, and overall I don't really have anything bad to say about it. Twice as far is guilty of giving a character a spotlight just to kill them. That character being Denise. I've mentioned this a lot now, but The Walking Dead became notorious for doing this around this time of the show. But her death is incredibly shocking and all around tragic. It also sets up a rivalry between Daryl and Dwight, and this definitely continues on, but this is also easily the most intense confrontation and the best decision they have, and it seems to carry the most weight behind it. It again makes the Saviors a pretty menacing force because of how many of them there still are. Now, Carol leaving feels kind of strange and forced. She didn't have any issues with killing or this life in general up until a few episodes ago, and very much feels like this was needed just for our characters to all leave and go search for her. Maybe people feel differently, and this feels natural. This is also why the reason the episode East is so strange, because I just don't buy into this version of Carol. This episode also completely reinforces how disappointing the Rick and Morgan reunion was this season. There was so much build-up throughout season 5, and it was super highly anticipated. They marketed the whole season around these two, and this is maybe the third or fourth scene that they're in together. They're just two very different characters, and they aren't really friends. Take out their history, and Morgan's really just like Rosita or Eugene in terms of how close he is with Rick. But this episode just gives you the feeling that something bad is coming. And with everybody going out on their own personal agendas, it feels a little contrived, but you're also on the edge of your seat because you're just like yelling at your screen, telling everybody to just go home. It's almost worse when you know what comes next and how easily it could have been avoided had Daryl and Carol just stayed in Alexandria. Last Day on Earth is a strange episode. It's super low rated, but the actual episode itself isn't bad at all. This is actually one of the most successful episodes in the series in terms of what they were trying to do. We start the episode with Rick's mindset. Here, there's only a few saviors. There might be a time in the future to do some battle, but they've got this. Oh, actually, there's quite a bit of them now. Maybe we'll just turn around and deal with this later. Wait a minute, how many saviors are there? We definitely can't take this on. The suspense and dread that builds as the episode goes on is terrifying, and it feels so isolating as it continues on, and there just ends up being more and more saviors. We know something bad is going to happen, but we didn't know how bad it was going to be. Everything about the entire ending scene is utterly amazing. Well, not everything, but the scene itself, seeing Rick absolutely terrified is
I'm working, baby. I'm working. I can't do
the
nothing.
performance here is incredible. I can remember watching the scene the first time when it aired, knowing that one of these characters that I really cared for was about to die. I remember my heart racing and having like nightmares about this scene afterwards. This is honestly up there with one of the scariest scenes I can think of, which sounds strange because it's not really that scary, but it's how I felt. And then we get the cliffhanger, otherwise known as the moment that The Walking Dead truly died. This cliffhanger encompassed everything that was wrong with the show, the manufactured story beats, disrespecting the audience's emotions and intelligence, holding out answers all for the sake of ratings, and after the very next episode, I think most people felt that was the nail in the coffin, and for all intents and purposes, who Negan really killed was you. But just as we had to wait to see who was killed next season, I'm going to wait to explain my full thoughts on the cliffhanger in the next video. So for those of you who still leave comments on the other video and say that it's a good cliffhanger, I'm going to tell you right now that you're wrong, and I'm going to die on that hill. The season has some very high highs. One of the highest rated episodes, 4 of the top 10 best episodes, 2 very solid storylines that are done pretty well. There are also
babies.
the other season that came before it. The biggest downfall
Babies.
comes down to one thing, and that's how it treated its audience like we were stupid. My girlfriend and I now have an inside joke when we watch something that's in black and white, and we're like, oh, this must take place in the past since it's black and white. And that stems from this season of the show. They didn't trust that we were smart enough to know the difference between the present day and what was in the past. They killed off Glenn, but didn't actually give us confirmation. Talked about him so much in the episodes afterwards. They didn't have Stephen Yeun on Talking Dead, which they always did with principal cast members that died. It wasn't shocking that he was alive. And the fact that they thought it would be tells me that they think I'm stupid. They didn't want to wrap up the first half of the season with an episode like No Way Out because they didn't trust that I was going to want to see what happens after that. So they gave me a bullshit episode like start to finish, in which basically nothing of importance happens. So that way I'd stick around for more afterwards. And if you didn't like that attack in the mid-season finale, guess what? They did it again in the actual season finale too. Audiences are smart. When you treat us like we're dumb, it doesn't really make me want to come back home. It's the sacrifice of art. It's the story business that shifts ratings and profits, and this season emphasized that more than ever before. It kind of proves that what ultimately killed the show was its own popularity and how people behind the scenes wanted to capitalize on it. So how can I possibly think this is the best season after that rant? The season came out when I was a senior in high school. At this point, all of my friends were watching the show. We'd have like Sunday night parties like it was the Super Bowl. And I have very fond memories watching this season. I also have a personal preference on the first half of the season with the herd of walkers. Kind of reminds me of the back half of season 4, and that was another portion of the show that I really loved. And I liked the build-up to Negan and how it really felt like something bad and big was coming. The season hits all the right notes for me personally and strikes all the right emotional chords. Whether that be because of the storyline itself or because it reminds me of who I was and where I was at that point in my life. The season has far more problems than any of the others that have come before it. I understand and recognize that, but with my own bias added in, this season is a 10 out of 10. It's the gold standard for me. When I think about this season, I don't think about all the bad things I mentioned. I think about how much I like both halves. I think back on the memories I have watching it for the first time and how this was my favorite and most enjoyable time watching The Walking Dead. And that rings true to this very day. What are your thoughts on Season 6? Am I crazy for giving it a 10? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Special thanks to all my channel members. You guys are the best. I appreciate your support more than you know. And if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. I apologize for the lateness of this video. I'm still getting over being sick, so sorry if my voice was a bit off in this video, but I'll be having Season 7 out by the end of this month too. So subscribe and make sure you don't miss it, and I'll see you all in the next one. Hopefully my voice will be better than it is now.
That's right, MP. They can't stop you.
Biggest fans we've seen yet. Make sure you disappoint.
All right, baby. Let's get down.
Because you
Huntress and Mike.
Season 7 of The Walking Dead was a huge turning point, both in the characters' lives and the audience's lives. It saw a massive drop-off in viewers, saw a lot of viewers lose faith in the show, even if they kept watching it, and it turned hardcore fans of the show, who once watched religiously every week, into casual fans by the end of it, myself included. Now, a big argument with this season is how most shows that go on this long reach a peak and then drop off. So is Season 7 a result of the show hitting its peak and casually falling off in viewership, or is it the result of something worse? Today we go over the premiere episode, the snail's pace that Season 7 introduced, and the introduction to the all-out war arc in the comics. We're also going to be going over why I believe Season 7 of The Walking Dead is by far the worst season of the show. So hand over your weapons, look out for that CGI deer, and let's talk The Walking Dead Season 7. So whenever I talk about this opening episode and subsequently the Season 6 finale, I see a lot of people now who look back fondly on the cliffhanger, saying, oh, it was really great. It made people want to watch the next episode. Yeah, that was never the problem. The show always made you want to watch the next episode, whether there was a cliffhanger or not, but this new wave of Walking Dead fans of the last years who watch the show on Netflix and think of the season finale of Season 6 and the Season 7
How is this nigga already hot?
two-parter. But the thing is, this wasn't the two-parter. Sure, it feels that way because it's seemingly written as a two-parter, but those of us who watched the show as it came out did not get to just click next episode. The Season 6 finale gets a very bad rap because of the cliffhanger, and if you look at all the reviews, all the recent ones say, oh, it's a great episode with a great cliffhanger, but all the older fans, like myself, are still very hurt by this cliffhanger. And I will always defend my stance that this is a bad cliffhanger. Call me bitter or salty or whatever, but this cliffhanger absolutely killed the show when it first came out and made fans lose faith in the show. Pair this with some other questionable things in Season 6, like the Glenn fake-out death, the pacing breakup with
the game already started and they put me cold.
In the episode before this and making us think he was going
That
to be
means
really
like my son is
absolutely nothing. I mean, he
not so
never
good
gets
right
any
now.
screen help for this bullet wound. It just kind of disappears. There were a lot of moments of fabricated stakes or suspense, and the cliffhanger was the worst example of that. The moment the ratings dipped even the slightest in Season 6, they wanted to do something to try and get a bunch of new audience members to watch, and I'll hand it to them. Their gimmick worked. For one episode. The Season 7 premiere is the second highest viewed episode in the entire show. Why? Because people wanted to see who Negan killed, but once that question was answered, any new viewers the show was trying to pick up didn't go past this point because they were satisfied with the kills that they saw on screen. Wouldn't the better marketing question going into this season be, how is Rick going to come back from all this? All of the marketing around this season was built around the first episode, and after that was over, it was kind of like, okay, now what? If we had seen Abraham die in the Season 6 finale, market the show around Negan's regime and how our group can possibly defeat him, it would have, at the very least, given people a reason to stick around longer. And they could have opened the episode on Glenn's death and give people an even bigger reason to want to buy into how Rick and the group are going to come back from all this. Sure, you can think that this is a good cliffhanger. I don't, and I never will, because I think how the show was handled during this crucial time ultimately led to the loss of even more viewers. Oh, you're wondering what my thoughts are on the deaths, and I've made you wait a few minutes longer? Yeah, imagine that, but on a scale of several months. And several more minutes from when the episode starts, as if you haven't waited long enough. Now we have to rebuild all the stress of that moment, a moment that was executed to perfection the first time around, so let's just redo that scene, but from different angles. I gotta take a moment to shout out Big Man Abraham, who doesn't ever get the respect he deserves, almost like these two episodes were handled very poorly, I don't know. In retrospect, it's incredibly obvious that he would be Negan's pick. He doesn't cower away from him, he all but vocally volunteered to be this death, and he doesn't get nearly enough love or attention from this death, from this sacrifice. It flips his goodbye scene with Eugene because now it's farewell to Abraham and not Eugene like we thought, And that's honestly very clever writing. R.I.P. Abraham, you left a very big hole in the show when you left, and you're not talked about nearly as much as you should be. Also, what did the Sasha and Abraham romance do exactly? Why was it necessary for him to break up with Rosita and then be with Sasha? Abraham could have went on the exact same journey that he went on, but with Rosita. It's not like either one of these couples was particularly budding with chemistry, so why change it? Oh, because Sasha didn't have a storyline. Let's just have her be the love interest too. So now we know who was killed. Alright, let's move on. Oh, no, wait, Daryl has to make the dumbest decision in the show and hit Negan with the arm that just hours earlier he was shot in the shoulder. So now we get the big death. Glenn's death was a big swing and a miss. Not literally, but I don't blame them for doing it. It was what happened in the comics. They wanted to try and be faithful to the source material, and they said that they tried playing around with different storylines if he survived, but it affected too much of the story. I don't know how true that is, but I think that in a way it made so much sense for it to be Glenn's character. The intent was for Glenn's death to be this hugely impactful death that the audience would want to see the downfall of Negan and put us in that place mentally that lusted for revenge. And on paper, I actually don't think that Abraham's death alone would have incited that. I think it had to be a character like Glenn or even Daryl to make us feel a strong enough hatred for Negan. Imagine if it had been Daryl. Would Academy Award-nominated actor Stephen Yeun be in a Glenn?
You should die. Yeah, it does.
was particularly budding with chemistry, so why change it? Oh, because Sasha didn't have a storyline. Let's just have her be the love interest to... He killed people, which was something he actively avoided doing throughout the entire apocalypse, and went out searching for Daryl just to find him and try to leave to go home. In the season 6 finale, Glenn has like 2 lines. In this episode, he had 1 line, so his last proper episode, where he has a lot of screen time, is in the episode East. But he doesn't particularly have a lot of lines or scenes in that episode either. Because of this, Glenn doesn't really get a complete character arc. And I hate the argument when people say, this is The Walking Dead, anybody can die at any time. You know a show that also totes that same line? Game of Thrones. Yet all the main characters that die in that, at least in the first few seasons, have complete character arcs, and their deaths are for more than just shock value. They actually change the story. The reason why all these deaths in Game of Thrones work is because of how well-paced each episode was. So let's move on to The Walking Dead Season 7's biggest enemy, pacing. Watching this season week to week was an absolute chore. I say this a lot in these videos, but from seasons 4 to 6, every Sunday in my house was like the Super Bowl because there were so many people coming over to watch the episode and talk about it afterwards, and by the end of season 7, there was me, my mom, my dad, and my best friend. From 15 to 20 people every week to 4. This was because most people stopped watching the show because they didn't care and it was too slow. We wanted to see Rick rally the troops and want to fight back. And it's kind of hard to do that when across the first half of the season, Rick is only in half of the episodes. We also get 5 of these 8 episodes that take place with one storyline in one location. We set up the Kingdom, we set up the Sanctuary, we set up Oceanside, we check in at Alexandria, we check in at the Hilltop, and after these 5 episodes, we are barely further along than we were at the end of episode 1. None of these episodes have any particular standout moments other than character introductions. Not to mention the tone of this season is just so wildly all over the place. The first half of season 6 felt urgent and emotional, and the stakes were very high. The second half felt like an impending doom was coming. Our characters were very confident, but the tone made us think that something was going to go wrong very soon. Season 7 has all this setup for so many different things in the first half, and the second half has a bit more cohesion with coming together, but it still suffers from pacing and boomerang storytelling. But there is a good aspect to this season that the other seasons didn't have, and that is, of course, Negan, or should I say Jeffrey Dean Morgan as Negan. His charisma and performance gives us this character that we love to hate, and sure, I see some of the complaints that he's a big, over-the-top, cartoony villain, but I actually like that aspect, especially during this rewatch. I found myself really looking forward to his scenes, and then kind of looking at my phone to take all these notes when there were other episodes with storylines I didn't care about. So I'm just going to rapid fire a few of my thoughts on these episodes in the first half of the season. Episode 2, I think Ezekiel and his over-the-top personality with Shiva and leading the Kingdom is really great, and Carrie Payton is really great as Ezekiel. We also get Jerry, and who doesn't love Jerry? They also feed pigs walkers to trade to the Saviors. Shouldn't this start a whole sickness arc once again at the Sanctuary, like what happened at the prison? Episode 3, a lot of really interesting ideas in this episode. I think that Dwight had huge possibilities of becoming a great and fan-favorite character, and I like him in this episode. The idea of captured Daryl and breaking him down to become one of Negan's men is also really interesting. It would have been absolutely incredible for Daryl to become a double agent and join Negan, and it's honestly really stupid that he didn't. The Sanctuary is an interesting place, and seeing how Negan runs it and how terrified people are gives you an additional feeling of hopelessness. But in terms of all the one storyline episodes, I actually think that this is probably the best one. Episode 4 proves that things get worse before they get better. This episode is almost more disheartening than the previous episodes, seeing everything that Rick and the Alexandrians have built all being taken over the course of a single afternoon. In a lot of ways, this episode is incredibly effective. Negan is equally charming and terrifying, and Rick is broken beyond repair. Anyone who had an issue with The Ones Who Live and how Rick acted in that show, and how Michonne had to come in and change his mind, how it's out of character for him, just do yourself a favor and rewatch this episode and this season in general. This episode also started Rosita having an actual character arc and presence in this story outside of being a love interest, and I sure hope that that continues. I also think this would have been better had Daryl shown up being part of the Saviors with both Rick and the audience, not yet knowing he's undercover. Episode 5. I guess it's cool to check in on Maggie in the hilltop, see her confront Gregory, but I don't particularly care about this Carl and Enid romance, and this is overall a pretty uneventful episode. Episode 6. This was at one point the lowest rated episode of the series, but honestly, I had more fun watching this episode than I did the last one. It's very obvious with the amount of guns that these women have, where the direction of the story is going from here, and again, I think that this could have been combined with like the last 4 episodes for them to all make 2 episodes with all this information and multiple storylines, and the show wouldn't have felt as slow as it is. It's also a famous episode for being Heath's last appearance and the first appearance of the PvP card, both of which we're still waiting for some sort of resolution to, and this episode came out in 2017. Episode 7. This is actually a good episode. Rosita having an actual character arc is making me think differently of her this time around. I think Carl going on a mission to the Sanctuary offers a lot of great moments and offers the full glimpse of the storyline AMC wants us all to forget. Again, I think this sets up a really great dynamic between Negan and Carl, and it's followed through for the next episode.
Okay, then. That's how we stand on business.
No excuses tonight, because I know you didn't go out last night.
Hey, MP. It's your world. We just live in it. Another game, another win. Back to work tomorrow.
Tonight should be easy work.